A narcissistic husband doesn't just argue, he controls. He makes every disagreement about power, not understanding. He interrupts, he dismisses, and he twists her words until she starts questioning whether her memory is right or wrong. His tone is not about conversation. It's about domination. He doesn't listen to her feelings because her feelings get in the way of his ego. He gives compliments, but they come with strings attached. A nice word today becomes leverage tomorrow. What looks like love is often manipulation, wrapped up in charm that convinces everyone else he's the perfect partner. While behind closed doors, she's shrinking smaller every day. And he uses silence as a weapon. He withholds affection, approval, or even basic attention until she bends to his way. When she tries to stand up for herself, he calls her dramatic, emotional, or too sensitive. The goal isn't solving the problem, it's making her the problem. He creates a world where she feels she owes him everything, where his mistakes become her fault, and her successes somehow threaten him. He keeps her on edge, never quite sure what version of him will walk through the door. One moment he's loving, the next he's cold. That unpredictability is what traps her, because she's always chasing the version of him that feels safe. Over time, she stops speaking up. She doubts her instincts. She second guesses her worth. And that's exactly how he wants it, because the less she believes in herself, the more control he has. But here's the truth. His treatment says nothing about her value and everything about his insecurity. Narcissism is about needing control at all costs, and the cost is always the people closest to him. Brian, would you like me to also shape this speech into something that empowers the dumbered wife directly, so it carries both awareness and encouragement in Jefferson Fisher's tone? A narcissistic husband doesn't enter a conversation with the goal of understanding or problem solving. He enters it with the goal of winning. Every word, every pause, every reaction is used like a tool to tip the balance of power in his favor. When his wife brings up a concern, instead of listening, he redirects. Instead of empathizing, he minimizes. If she points out a hurtful action, he shifts the focus back on her, making her feel like she's the one who's unreasonable. It's not about resolving the issue. It's about keeping her off balance so she doubts herself. And he maintains control. In these moments, connection is impossible because connection requires vulnerability and equality. And those two things are threats to him. He can't allow space for her feelings because her feelings would mean he has to share the stage. And narcissism doesn't share. So the conversation turns into a battleground where his ego must come out on top, even if it means tearing her down. Over time, she learns that bringing up her needs, her thoughts, or even small preferences isn't worth it, because instead of meeting her halfway, he'll use the moment to remind her who's in charge. This dynamic doesn't just erode communication. It erodes trust, intimacy, and her sense of safety in the relationship. The conversation becomes a weapon, not a bridge. Do you want me to expand the other points in the same style so you'd have a full speech-like script? When a narcissistic husband dismisses or twists his wife's words, it's not just about disagreement. It's about control of reality. She can say something as simple as "that hurt me." And instead of acknowledging her pain, he'll respond with, "You're imagining things," or "that never happened." If she recalls an event, he'll subtly alter the details, insisting she got it wrong until she starts to doubt her own memory. This isn't an accident. It's deliberate gaslighting designed to make her feel like she can't trust herself. The more he does this, the more she relies on his version of events instead of her own. He becomes the authority on what's true and what isn't, while she slowly loses confidence in her perception. Over time, she begins to question not just arguments but her instincts, her feelings, and her ability to judge situations accurately. This is exactly what he wants, because a wife who doubts her own mind is easier to manipulate. By constantly twisting her words, he creates a cycle where she feels like she's the problem for even speaking up. She learns to silence herself, not because she doesn't have a voice, but because every time she uses it, he rewrites the narrative to make her look foolish or unstable. It's not a disagreement. It's a strategy to keep her dependent, confused, and under his control. Would you like me to take the next point and expand it too? So we build this into a full-flowing speech, step by step. When a narcissistic husband interrupts and talks over his wife, it's not just rudeness. It's a tactic. He cuts her off mid-sentence because letting her finish would mean giving her voice space, and her voice threatens his control. By talking over her, he sends the message that her words carry less weight than his, that her perspective doesn't deserve the floor. The conversation becomes less about exchange and more about dominance, with him using volume and timing as tools to silence her. Every interruption chips away at her confidence. She starts to anticipate being cut off, so she shortens her thoughts or avoids bringing them up altogether. Instead of feeling like an equal partner, she feels like an unwanted guest in her own relationship. And the more he talks over her, the more he reinforces the idea that what she has to say is insignificant compared to what he has to say. This isn't accidental. It's the performance of power. He wants the room, the conversation, and the energy to revolve around him. By controlling the airspace, he controls the narrative. And in doing so, he makes sure she doesn't just lose her place in the conversation, she starts to lose her place in the relationship. When a narcissistic husband gives a compliment, it rarely stands on its own. On the surface, it sounds like affection, but underneath, it's a transaction. He might tell his wife she looks beautiful, but later use that compliment to remind her she owes him attention, compliance, or gratitude. The praise isn't about uplifting her. It's about creating a sense of debt. What should feel like love ends up feeling like leverage. Over time, she learns that his kind words are conditional. They show up when he wants something, when he needs her to fall in line, or when he's repairing damage from his own behavior. Instead of being reassured by his approval, she feels trapped by it, because it always comes at a cost. The moment she doesn't repay the compliment with obedience or validation, he can withdraw the kindness just as quickly. This cycle makes her question whether his affection is ever real. She starts to see that his praise isn't given to honor her, but to manage her. It becomes another tool of another way to keep her controlled by making her crave approval that is never unconditional. And slowly, what should be the sweetest words in a marriage turn into ... a subtle reminder that nothing he gives comes without a price. A narcissistic husband often shines the brightest when other people are watching. He's the man who makes strangers laugh, the one who charms family members, the one who seems endlessly attentive and thoughtful. In public settings, to outsiders, he looks like the perfect partner, caring, witty, and devoted. But behind that polished mask is a very different reality. At home, away from the eyes of others, that charm is replaced with control, criticism, and manipulation. This contrast is intentional. His public image becomes a shield, protecting him from being questioned and protecting the truth from being believed. If his wife ever speaks up about the way he treats her privately, people find it hard to reconcile. They've seen the smile, the jokes, the gestures of affection in public. They doubt her before they doubt him, and that's exactly what he counts on. The wife feels trapped in this double life. In public, she's expected to smile and play along, because if she doesn't, she looks ungrateful or bitter next to his shining performance. In private, she pays the price if she disrupts the image he's carefully built. That charm isn't just for show. It's a weapon, one that isolates her and makes her feel invisible, because no one sees the version of him she lives with every day. And would you like me to continue with the next point? He withholds affection, attention, or approval to punish and control in the same expanded style. When a narcissistic husband withholds affection, attention, or approval, it isn't out of indifference. It's deliberate punishment. He knows love and validation are powerful needs, and by pulling them away, he creates a void his wife feels desperate to fill. One day he might shower her with affection, and the next he turns cold and distant, offering nothing but silence. This isn't random. It's a calculated way to make her chase after his approval, to remind her that closeness happens only on his terms. The silent treatment becomes one of his sharpest tools. By ignoring her, refusing eye contact, or acting as though she doesn't exist, he communicates that she's done something wrong, even if she hasn't. The absence of affection isn't just emotional neglect. It's control. It forces her to bend, to apologize, to try harder, all in hopes of getting back the warmth he has chosen to withhold. Over time, this pattern creates a cycle of dependency. She learns that love is unstable, that it can disappear if she doesn't comply. Instead of feeling safe in her marriage, she feels like she's constantly watched. When a wife finally finds the courage to stand up for herself, a narcissistic husband doesn't meet her words with understanding. He shuts them down by attacking her credibility. The moment she expresses hurt, frustration, or even a simple boundary, he slaps on the label of too sensitive or dramatic. By doing this, he shifts the focus away from his behavior and onto her reaction. Suddenly, the issue is no longer what he did. It's how she responded. This tactic is designed to make her doubt the validity of her own feelings. If she cries, he mocks her. If she raises her voice, he calls her hysterical. If she calmly explains herself, he still accuses her of overreacting. No matter how she communicates, he twists it into proof that the problem isn't him. It's her. Over time, she learns that speaking up won't get her respect or change. It will only earn her another round of insults and dismissal. The damage of this runs deep. She begins to suppress her emotions, convincing herself she might actually be overreacting, that maybe she is too sensitive. She learns to silence her needs, not because they aren't real, but because he's conditioned her to believe they don't matter. By minimizing her feelings, he keeps the power and avoids accountability, turning her attempts at self-advocacy into ammunition against her. Would you like me to expand the next point? Problems in the marriage always become her fault, never his responsibility. In the same style, in a marriage with a narcissistic husband, accountability rarely exists on his side. When conflict arises, his instinct isn't to reflect or repair. It's to deflect. Every disagreement, every disappointment, every failure in the relationship somehow circles back to being her fault. If he loses his temper, it's because she provoked him. If he neglects her needs, it's because she's too demanding. If he's unfaithful, it's because she didn't give him enough attention. Nothing lands on him, because admitting responsibility would mean admitting imperfection. And that's something his ego can't allow. This constant blame shifting creates a distorted reality where the wife is carrying the weight of every problem, even the ones she didn't cause. She starts apologizing for things that aren't her fault, smoothing over situations that weren't her doing, and working twice as hard to fix issues that he created. The more he denies responsibility, the more she feels responsible for holding the marriage together. Over time, she internalizes his narrative and begins to believe that maybe she is the problem. This is exactly what he wants, because as long as she's questioning herself, she won't question him. By making her the scapegoat for every crack in the relationship, he protects his image and reinforces her dependence, ensuring the cycle of blame keeps spinning in his favor. Would you like me to expand the next point? Her successes can make him insecure, so he downplays or resents them. In the same detailed way, When a wife experiences success, whether it's in her career, her personal growth, or even small achievements, a narcissistic husband often doesn't celebrate it. He feels threatened by it. Her progress highlights his insecurities, because deep down he fears being overshadowed or losing control. Instead of being proud, he finds ways to downplay her accomplishments. He might make a sarcastic comment, shift the conversation back to himself, or suggest her achievement isn't that impressive. What should be a moment of joy becomes a moment of tension. Sometimes his resentment is more subtle. He may withdraw affection, act distant, or pick a fight around the time she's doing well. Other times it's blatant. He mocks her, criticizes her effort, or reminds her of his own supposed superiority. His message is clear. Her shine is a threat to his spotlight, and he won't allow her to feel too good about herself. Over time, this reaction conditions her to hide or minimize her own achievements. Instead of feeling safe to grow and thrive, she feels guilty or anxious about it. She learns that celebrating herself comes at the cost of his approval, so she stays small to keep the peace. By resenting her success, he strips away her right to feel proud of her own journey, keeping her stuck in a version of life where his ego always comes first. Do you want me to continue with the next point? He creates constant unpredictability, warm one moment, cold the next, and expanded in the same style.
She begins to doubt her instincts and second-guess her worth because the constant manipulation erodes her trust in herself. Every time she feels hurt and speaks up, he tells her she's overreacting. Every time she remembers an event one way, he insists she has it wrong. Every time she senses something is off, he convinces her it's all in her head. Little by little, she stops believing her own feelings, her own memories, her own judgment. What once felt clear now feels uncertain, and in that uncertainty, he gains more power. As her confidence weakens, she starts looking to him for validation, even about the smallest things. She wonders if she's good enough, smart enough, lovable enough. His voice becomes louder than her inner voice, and his opinion becomes the measure of her worth. When he withholds approval or criticizes her, she takes it as truth rather than recognizing it as manipulation. The danger of this doubt is that it doesn't just affect how she sees herself in the marriage. It spreads into every area of her life. She questions her abilities at work, her relationships with friends, even her role as a mother, if they have children. What she doesn't realize is that this doubt is by design. By making her distrust herself, he ensures she depends on him for direction, validation, and identity. Her worth feels smaller and smaller, not because she is less, but because he has convinced her to see herself through his distorted lens. Now, would you like me to expand the next point? His treatment is a reflection of his insecurity, not her value, in the same style. His treatment is a reflection of his insecurity, not her value, though he works hard to convince her otherwise. A narcissistic husband projects his own fears and inadequacies onto his wife so he doesn't have to face them himself. If he feels small, he makes her feel smaller. If he feels unworthy, he convinces her she's the one who doesn't measure up. Every criticism, every attempt to tear her down says more about the battles inside of him than it does about who she is. The cruel irony is that she often internalizes his behavior as proof that she isn't good enough, when in reality, it's proof that he isn't secure enough. A confident, healthy partner doesn't need to control or belittle to feel strong. A secure man doesn't gain power by taking it from someone else. His need to dominate and diminish her reveals the cracks in his own self-image. But instead of repairing them, he uses her as a shield for his weakness. When she finally sees his treatment through this lens, she realizes the problem was never her worth. It was his fear of losing control. His behavior isn't evidence that she lacks value. It's evidence that he lacks the capacity to love without conditions. The truth is that her worth remains intact no matter how he treats her, but as long as she believes his actions define her, he keeps the power. The moment she understands his treatment is rooted in his insecurity, she begins to reclaim the identity he worked so hard to strip away. Would you like me to expand the very last point? The cycle thrives on silence. But naming the behavior is the first step to breaking free in the same style. The cycle thrives on silence, but naming the behavior is the first step to breaking free. Because silence is what keeps the manipulation alive. When a wife stays quiet, whether out of fear, exhaustion, or self-doubt, the narcissistic husband's control goes unchallenged. His words remain the only narrative, his version of reality the only truth. That silence becomes a cage, locking her into patterns that feel impossible to escape. He relies on it because as long as she doesn't call out what's happening, he doesn't have to face accountability. But the moment she begins to name the behavior for what it is, gaslighting, manipulation, emotional abuse, the power dynamic shifts. Naming it breaks the illusion that she is the problem and places responsibility where it belongs. It strips away the confusion he spent so much time creating. Words have weight, and when she can clearly identify his tactics, she begins to separate her identity from his control. This step doesn't magically end the cycle, but it opens the door to freedom. It creates space for her to seek support, to rebuild trust in her own instincts, and to recognize that what she's experiencing isn't love, it's control. Silence keeps her trapped, but truth spoken out loud becomes a weapon he can't easily take away. The very act of naming the behavior is an act of reclaiming her voice. And that voice is the first piece of herself she needs to step toward break.